877-970-2999. It's Morano on AM 970. The Answer.
I like to teach the world to sing. Sing with me. Perfect harmony. Perfect harmony. I like to buy the world a Coke and keep it company. And the real I like to teach the world.
Ah, yes, Coca-Cola. Who doesn't love it? It's delicious. Maybe it's not so nutritious. Oh, it'll rot your teeth. But when you think of Coca-Cola and these snazzy commercials and this great tune, one thing you don't usually think of is a whole lot of violence. At least that was until the Killer Coke campaign. Good morning, everyone. I'm Frank Morano. Thanks for listening to me on AM 970 The Answer and starting your Sunday morning with me. Well, I am just thrilled because we have a real legend in studio with us. A longtime labor rights activist, a union organizer, someone that was the founder of the Killer Coke campaign. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome a gentleman that I've admired for many, many years, the director of Corporate Campaign Inc., Ray Rogers. Ray, thanks so much for coming on the radio with me this morning.
Oh, Frank, thank you for that introduction. Can I hire you as a public relations consultant?
I think I'm the last person that you need to hire to influence public relations. I want to talk to you about some of the very exciting things that you're doing now, because it is about an issue that I am very passionate about and have followed for many, many years. But a couple of our listeners may not be familiar with the Killer Coke campaign and what Killer Coke is. Killer Coke is about a lot more than Coca-Cola just causing obesity and cavities, isn't it?
Yes, it is. In fact, the reason I got involved in it and created a campaign to stop Killer Coke was when a couple of esteemed human rights attorneys contacted me and said, we have a serious life and death situation in Latin America, and we really need your help. And it was about the Coca-Cola being involved in the systematic intimidation, kidnapping, torture, and murder of union leaders. Complicity in those things.
So you're talking about a company, Coca-Cola, being involved in the systematic kidnapping, torture, and this incredible campaign of violence against union leaders. What exactly was happening?
Well, kidnapping, torture, and murder of union leaders and family members in order to basically stop their organizing efforts in Colombia. And I know this sounds outrageous.
Right. It sounds like almost Alex Jones territory.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you,
of conspiracy theories.
When these attorneys came to me, I thought it was outrageous. And I said, look, I got to investigate this before I'll get involved. But knowing who you are, I got to imagine this is based on something real. So I started investigating Coca-Cola and found the very same thing happened in the 70s and 80s in Guatemala, where a dozen union leaders were kidnapped, tortured, and murdered or disappeared, and they were tied into the labor struggle of Coca-Cola plants there. Eventually, Coca-Cola, under great pressure worldwide, had to go in and make changes, let's put it that way, which they did. They were forced to. But then the same thing has popped up in Colombia and again in Guatemala. The same conditions there.
So is this happening now, presently? Is Coca-Cola as a company torturing, kidnapping, and murdering union activists and their families around the world?
Well, let me make one thing clear. I've gone through a few CEOs by going at their annual meetings and challenging the CEOs on these subjects every year, going back to 2004.
Now, I want to reiterate what you're saying here. What you're saying is you confront these CEOs of Coca-Cola, and in some instances, it's actually repeatedly led to their ouster.
Well, let me just say that right now I'm into the third CEO, who I got it to some credit. He felt enough heat to decide to fly up to New York and have 2 private meetings with me. They treated me like a king, but I made it very clear I can't be hired, I can't be co-opted, I can't be bought off. I want justice. Otherwise, quite frankly, I could be a very rich man right now.
Right. So what is the situation now in terms of what Coke is doing, to the extent that you know?
Well, first of all, let me just say that one thing about Coca-Cola, it's a big lie. And I'd like to just go back to what's happened in Colombia, where over the years, going back to 1990, right up until the present, we've had, I think I'm trying to think, about 12 union leaders and several family members who have been the victims of paramilitary death squad violence, all right?
Is what you described here, the systematic kidnapping, torture, and murder of union leaders and their families, still going on around the world at the hands of Coca-Cola?
What I'm saying, certainly in Latin America, and particularly in Colombia and in Guatemala, there's still great danger for workers at these plants. The campaign certainly has had an effect on the scrutiny and helping to alleviate some of these things. Some of the things that are going on within political circles in Colombia have happened to make things a little bit better. But yes, what I'm saying is that the workers at these Coca-Cola plants, without a union, they basically have a target on their back. And I'm amazed that some of the union leaders down there that have stood up are still alive today. A number of their colleagues are not. Coca-Cola likes to talk about all the people that they employ in Colombia, but they're really not employees. They're make-believe employees. They're all subcontracted workers that don't have any rights to unionize. When the workers down there try to unionize in Colombia, they get fired. Just simple as that. They have no rights. And in Colombia, we have a situation there where there are still outstanding lawsuits regarding a couple of union leaders, one who is in the United States now on political asylum because of the threats against him and his family. Another one had his son, his nephew, and his murdered, and his daughter gang raped. Now, these are things that, these lawyers did great work, but to get justice in the courts in Colombia, forget it. To get justice in the courts in the U.S. against a company like Coca-Cola around these issues, again, it's almost impossible. And I got to give the lawyers credit for all the work that they did, but at the same time, I give students a lot of credit because we got Coke kicked off of so many college and university campuses around these human rights abuses, one of which is City University of New York.
Wow.
I think that one contract cost Coke probably about $100 million loss. You can't buy any Coke products on that university right now.
Well, good for you.
Okay? State University of New York.
What do we know about Coca-Cola's ethics and business practices within the United States? Are they a better actor here? I think they'd have to be.
Well, they have no choice but to be a better actor, although I'll tell you one thing that has run rampant throughout the Coca-Cola system for many years, and which they paid huge fines back there on a big racial discrimination settlement case in like 2002, 2003. You still have serious cases of racial discrimination that pop up all the time, including here in New York City, okay? But in terms of Coca-Cola, I'll give you another example. Coca-Cola talks about how clean its supply chain is. We are pure. Our products are pure. They're actually very healthy for you. If you can believe this. It's
Sure.
one big lie, right? Coca-Cola is involved in using illegal in the harvesting of sugarcane for the sugar processes. There is massive children doing this very dangerous, hazardous child labor in these harvesting of sugarcane for their sugar processes. There was a film on national TV in 2008 in England that exposed this, and one could say, well, that was 2008. Well, what happened? They went into fields that Coca-Cola claimed in 2004 were all cleaned up. These conditions still exist. I raised at the Coke's annual meeting the whole child labor issue. They didn't want to hear it, and I said to the CEO, you know how you can change child labor, deal with the child labor situation with your sugar processes? Is Coca-Cola CEO Muhtar Kent, if you will agree to this, I will applaud you right here in front of all your stockholders. Will you guarantee me that the sugar harvesters, one, will be paid a fair wage to harvest to harvest the sugar cane, so that their children can go to school and go to the playgrounds where they belong? Will you guarantee their right if they want to join a union of their choice? He didn't want to hear it. He wouldn't respond to the question. But you've got a serious situation. Again, there's so many children involved in the harvesting of sugarcane for Coca-Cola sugar processes. That doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
And all you got to do is make sure that the parents of those children are paid a fair wage and not exploited like they are.
It's safe to say you're a Pepsi man.
No, it's safe to say I don't drink soda, thank goodness, because I know the health consequences.
Fair enough. Now, you used the term campaign and the campaign you waged against Coke a couple of times. And so I was going to ask you to explain exactly what it is that you do with corporate campaigns. But then I actually came across an interview that I did with our mutual friend Ralph Nader, I guess about 2 years ago. And he said, if somebody's got some extra money, they should give it to you. And in the context of explaining why, he, I think, did a great job explaining what it is that you do as the director of corporate campaign aid. This is Ralph Nader talking to me about 2 years ago.
Let's say you have an enlightened gentleman or gentlewoman in New York City, Frank, and they've got a lot of money, and they want to do something for humanity. Well, they can hire somebody like Ray Rogers in New York City, who is a famous corporate campaigner, on the behalf of workers, on behalf of consumers. He knows how to really develop a campaign, contact the board of directors, contact the media. He knows the vulnerabilities of companies like Mylan, and he gets these companies to turn around in their decision. So this is an example. In other words, there's a huge backlash coming here, and it's going to open up a lot of skeletons in Mylan's closet. Now, Mylan is fighting back by saying, well, we're going to give a $300 coupon. Can you imagine how much profit there is in this product if you can give a $300 coupon to certain people?
We were talking about a drug company that chose to raise the price of insulin and some other diabetes medication that people need to live exponentially. And he said they should find people like Ray Rogers. So you do these corporate campaigns, which I think is just so fascinating. How did you get started with that?
Well, I developed the corporate campaign concept, a term that I coined back in the mid-'70s to take on a company, a big textile firm called J.P. Stevens, on which the film Norma Ray was based. And the unions at that time and were going to do an international consumer boycott to win what was about a 15-year labor struggle against J.P. Stevens and open up the South to unionization. The textile workers were horrible working conditions, the safety conditions, it's just horrible conditions, the way they were treated down there. And I realized that J.P. Stevens was not susceptible to a consumer boycott, so I created the corporate campaign concept. And if you were going to go back and look at the headlines, so go to my website, corporatecampaign.org, and go to my campaign section, and see the headlines at that time in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fortune. Another CEO resigns, another CEO resigns, another CEO resigns. That was me. Mm-hmm. I created, I said, I'm going to bring pressure to bear on the members of the 13 members of the board of directors of that company. And when I bring pressure to bear on them, if we don't get this situation resolved with J.P. Stevens fairly for the workers, then I'm going to demand resignations from these various boards. And I remember a reporter at the Wall Street Journal told me, you're crazy, this will never happen. Well, it did happen. So the first resignations were two CEOs of J.P. Stevens and the CEO of another company were forced to resign from Manufacturers Hanover Bank.
Wow.
Shortly after that, the CEO of Avon Products resigned from J.P. Stevens, and not long thereafter, the CEO of J.P. Stevens and New York Life Insurance Company, 24 hours after the head of New York Life said no such resignations will ever take place, those resignations took place.
The reason I so
By the way, that was confronting power with power.
Yeah, and if people are just tuning in, we're talking with Ray Rogers. He's the director of corporate campaign Inc. You can go to his website, stopkillercoke.org, to learn more about the Killer Coke campaign specifically. But the reason I sincerely, and I don't want to sound patronizing, I really admire people like you and Ralph Nader is because so often all of us in our everyday lives see injustice. We see injustice in the workplace, in politics, in the consumer arena, in business, in sports, and we just feel powerless to do anything about it, powerless to change anything. Even sometimes people of mine, colleagues of mine that are working in the media, they tell me they feel like they can't make a difference. Even sometimes friends of mine that are in elective office in politics, they feel like Sisyphus pushing a rock up a giant hill. But what you've done repeatedly throughout your entire career is really show that one man can make a difference, and that's what I think is such an inspiring part of what you've done. Now, I want to ask you about what you're doing now, the campaign that you're leading now, because it has to do with an issue that I am single-mindedly, I should say, more passionate about than almost anything else in the world, and that is the destruction of small business in New York City. And it goes way beyond the destruction of small business in New York City, because the ripple effect of that is the destruction of New York City's neighborhoods in itself and the destruction of New York. Now, you've got these signs that I've seen a lot of people, a lot of activists start carrying around. Beware of REBNY, real estate bullies plaguing New York. Now, I know what REBNY is, but this is not a household name with a lot of our listeners. What's REBNY, and what are you trying to do?
Well, we're trying to make REBNY a household name here throughout New York City and New York State. REBNY stands for the Real Estate Board of New York. That's the acronym for the Real Estate Board of New York. It more appropriately stands for the Real Estate Bullies of New York, ravaging every borough of New York City. They're one of the worst institutions to ever plague the city. And they are run by REBNY is run by a bunch of billionaire racketeers and bullies. They have more than 17,000 members. Over 80% of those members are hardworking agents, for these real estate companies. Mm-hmm. But the people that control REBNY are these developers and property speculators and landlords that are ripping the city apart. You're talking about an issue that's passionate to you and it's passionate to me. All you got to do is go around anywhere in New York City and see all the storefronts shut down.
Every day.
All the office buildings shut down that you don't notice as much of the storefronts, and they're being warehoused. And everybody's being priced out of New York. Who's behind this? The Real Estate Board of New York, REBNY, those racketeers and bullies.
So in a nutshell, tell me what they're doing.
Well, I'll tell you what they're doing. Number one is they're making sure that the Small Business Job Survival Act that would create a level playing field for small business is in this city with the landlords, okay, that it never gets passed. And REBNY prides itself on never allowing this bill to pass. What this bill would do is this. It's not a rent control bill. It levels the playing field. It would allow small business owners to negotiate. They would have a right to negotiate long-term leases, say 10-year leases, and there would be an arbitration clause. So if the landlord is trying to price gouge them, it would go to arbitration. That would create a whole different set of dynamics than a landlord coming in and telling you, oh, by the way, your lease is up. We're going to multiply your rent like a small Chinese restaurant in Greenwich Village went from $5,000 a month to $25,000 a month.
Now, one of the things, my first awakening of what REBNY was about 9 or 10 years ago when I was involved in the Independence Party. And I joined the Independence Party with the best of intentions, hoping it would be a vehicle to reform politics. And I was told by the chairman of the Independence Party that we're trying to make a deal with REBNY. They're going to give us a whole bunch of money, and we're essentially going to be REBNY's political party and enforce whatever agenda they want. I said, my goodness. I mean, who are these guys that can have all this influence with the Independence Party? Then I find out that it was not just limited to the Independence Party. They have influence in the Democratic Party, in the Conservative Party, in the Republican Party, and even beyond electoral politics. How did they get such a stranglehold on government and politics? Is it simply through money?
Yes, it's called dirty money in politics, okay? And it is all about money. And so that's why we need a reform in our political system that allows these big money players to go in and buy our politicians. Buy them or rent them, however way you want to describe it, okay? Look, we have, when you talk about they're willing to go out and buy any political party, you got in the Democrats right now, and I want to make one thing clear, okay? I support political leaders that stand up for justice, stand up for democracy. Whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, Green Party, you name it, all right? I'm not a conservative. I'm not a liberal. I support justice. That's where I stand. I'm not a socialist. I'm not a communist. I'm for justice. Now, what REBNY has done is what's very important to REBNY, because this involves how billions of dollars flow, billions of dollars of our tax money flows. They right now want to make sure they control the Senate in New York State. So what they've done is they support what's called the Independent Democratic Conference. These are 8 senators, state senators, who are democratically elected as Democrats. But what they do is they vote with the Republicans, so the Republicans still maintain control of the New York State Senate. Now, why do they do this? There's 2 key reasons for REBNY. One is they want to keep the billions of dollars in tax abatements and subsidies flowing into the real estate interests, number one. Number 2, they want to undermine all rent stabilization and rent control laws. They'd like to completely nullify them in the state of New York. Well, you know, and that focuses on New York City, really.
I do, and by the way, if people want to learn more about this campaign, they can go to stoprebnybullies.org. I don't want to get into a whole conversation about the IDC because it's going to require a longer conversation. We'll have you back and talk about this. And even without the IDC, because of Simca Felder, the Republican majority would still be in the majority as long as Simca continues to vote for them. But we'll save that discussion for another day. I do want to play a minute or so of this magnificent 5-minute animated film that you have made called Bullies. And I am posting it on my Facebook page right now, and I want to encourage people to watch all 5 minutes of it after the show. Keep listening to me and then watch this after the show because it is just brilliant. And you're not going to be able to see the animation on the radio, but you need to watch this because it's outstanding. This is the very beginning of Bullies by Ray Rogers.
This is New York City. Your home, my home, home to 8.5 million people. But there is a shadow being cast over our home. New Yorkers are tough, and we don't like bullies, but we are now under attack. And the enemy is among us, above us, in the high rises, but looking down on us. In these billion-dollar offices are the leaders of REBNY, the Real Estate Board of New York. REBNY members look down upon the city they control. We are at the mercy of REBNY, and many of us don't know who they are or what they do.
I think, and you got to watch the whole 5 minutes because it's really terrific. My only regret is that I didn't get to narrate this because I so want to be a part of exposing the REBNY fight, and I'm hoping we're doing a little bit of that here today. Now, I asked you a little bit about this right before we got on air, and I was surprised by your response. Were you hired to do this by some union or some labor activist or something like that? Who put together the funding for this short film, Bullies?
Well, actually, I funded the campaign, all right, from money that I've made from working with various groups. But there is one union leader in the city. To me, he stands out, a giant amongst giants. It's Terry Moore, who's the head of Local 46 of the Ironworkers. He came to me, or I came to him, or somehow we met, and he grilled me. And I said, listen, this situation with REBNY is getting out of hand. And he said, look, and he told me, they're wiping out all the construction unions. And what bothered me was I saw the way a lot of these construction workers today are being treated when I was down there in my own office in Dumbo with Jed and David Walentis and Two Trees Management, and horrible conditions that I saw these workers working in. So I wanted to go after them on a union basis. And as I investigated REBNY, I realized, wait a minute, this REBNY situation is a lot worse than simply what's happening to these construction workers and a busting of the construction unions. When we talk about massive displacement of possibly millions of people here in New York City, and what's happening to the small businesses, you see a piece of property, a school, a public hospital, a library, a historic building, a playground. When somebody in REBNY sees that for property speculation, they decide they want it. That school, the playground, the library, all of it, it's gone.
Let me end with this, and I could talk with you about all this stuff all day, and I've already learned a great deal in the last 15 minutes or so. But we have a lot of conservatives listening to the show right now, a lot of Trump supporters, and they're listening to you saying, okay, this guy wants to undo Republican control of the state Senate. He sounds very pro-union, very pro-labor. He's against big business. Maybe he says he's not a socialist, but he doesn't sound like a conservative. Speak to the conservatives in our audience. Why is the fight against REBNY, the fight to pass the Small Business Job Survival Act, why is that something that conservatives should embrace?
Well, because a lot of the people their small businesses are being shut down, a lot of the people who are being priced out of the market, just because people are conservative don't mean they're very wealthy. They're very much a part of the 99% as well. And they're being priced out of New York City, and it's being done by these big property speculators and developers that are making billions on their backs. These communities that they built up, and I don't care whether we talk about Harlem, East Harlem, whether we talk about Inwood, whether we go out to Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island. Okay, you got conservatives, you got liberals, you got progressives. It doesn't matter. They're all being damaged, hurt. So this is an issue that goes way beyond whether you're progressive or liberal or a conservative. This is everybody involved. You could say it's class warfare. It's the billionaire bullies or the people that maybe they're not making billions, they're making hundreds of millions versus everybody else. And they're hurting all of us. And the Real Estate Board of New York is the head of the monster that's causing all these problems that are going on today that's affecting so many renters, small business owners, you name it.
And a lot of these big businesses that are part of REBNY have no problem enjoying a government handout as long as it's a handout for them and some government subsidies.
Billions of dollars. You know, you talk about one of the biggest developers, Tishman Speyer. They were building 3 towers that were supposed to provide affordable housing with 1,800 units, and they were getting a $200 million tax abatement because of a loophole in the law. They're keeping the $200 million, but they're not providing any affordable housing. And by the way, this affordable housing by the mayor, who I thought was going to be the greatest mayor the city ever saw, but I couldn't vote for him in the last election, this is a scam. This affordable housing for who?
For who indeed? This is Ray Rogers, folks. You want to go online to learn more about the campaign to stop REBNY, go to stoprebnybullies.org. Ray Rogers, thanks a lot. I hope you'll come back again soon.
Frank, anytime, any day.
If you want to comment on any portion of our conversation, you're welcome to give me a call at 877-970-2999. That's 877-970-2999. This is Frank Morano on AM 970, The Answer.
More wit and wisdom in just a moment.